reading today from the book of Psalms, Psalm 51. For the director of music, a psalm of David. When the prophet David came to him after David had committed adultery with Bathsheba. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you, you only have I sinned, and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are proved right when you speak, and justified when you judge. Surely I was sinful at birth from the time my mother conceived me. Surely you desire truth in the inner parts. You teach me wisdom in the inmost place. Cleanse me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquity. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will turn back to you. Save me from blood guilt, O God, the God who saves me, and my tongue will sing of your righteousness. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth will declare your praise. You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. In your good pleasure make Zion prosper. Build up the walls of Jerusalem. There will be righteous sacrifices, whole burnt offerings to delight you. Then bulls will be offered on your altar. David's the king. He was anointed by the prophet Samuel, who declared that he was a man after God's own heart. But something happened to David. Somewhere along the lines, he decided, as Mel Brooks famously said, it's good to be the king. You know, king, you get to do whatever you want to. The rules don't apply to you. And David is in his palace overlooking Jerusalem one night, and as he's looking over Jerusalem, he sees a woman bathing on her roof. Now, understand something. Rooftops were where the people in Jerusalem bathed. For the most part, if you were in the center of your roof, nobody on the street could see you. So that's where they went at night, in the evening, to bathe. Now, because David is on the palace on top of the hill, he can see everybody's roof. So he sees Bathsheba bathing on her roof. And he sends for her. And he takes her. And then he sends her home. Realizing that she is not just a married woman, but married to one of his generals, he sends her his general who's on the front and says, hey, you need to come home, hoping that he can hide his sin. And the general comes home, but the general, because his men are still out in the field, refuses to go back to his house to sleep. Far be it for me to sleep in my warm bed when my men are out sleeping on the ground. So David sends him back to the front with a message to his commander, and he says, next time you attack the city, put him in the thickest part of the fighting, and then have everybody else leave so that he will be killed. And the commander does what David has told him to, and Uriah is killed. And David thinks he's gotten away with it. It's good to be the king. But God knew what had happened. And God sent the prophet Nathan to speak to David. And Nathan tells him a parable about a small farmer who has a little girl, and they have a little lamb. And the little girl loves that lamb. And they have a rich neighbor who has many sheep. And one day a visitor comes to the neighbors, and the rich man goes and takes the lamb away from his poor neighbor and his poor neighbor's daughter and has it killed for the feast. And David is furious. And he says, this man shall be punished, and he shall have to pay 4 times what he took. Who is he? And Nathan looks right at David and says, you are the man. David knows instantly that God knows what he did. He knows instantly that his sin has found him out. And as David had judged 4 times, he would pay. David would go on to lose 4 of his children, who he loved, before he died. David is devastated by the revelation of his own sin. And during this time of confession, David writes one of the most poignant of all of his psalms, Psalm 51. David and Bathsheba, the story is sometimes just told as a story of adultery, but it's not. It's a story about power. There are people who want to kind of paint Bathsheba as a temptress. What's she doing naked up on her roof? Well, that's where you went to bathe. She went to David willingly. Did she have a choice? David's the king. He sends soldiers and says, come to the palace. You go to the palace. It's not a sin of David and Bathsheba. It's David's sin. And even in his confession, David gets something wrong. He says, God, against you and you only have I sinned. No, David. You sinned against Bathsheba and you sinned against Uriah. You didn't just sin against God. Now, yes, the sin was against God as well. David's still trying to hedge his bets a little bit here on his responsibility. Poor Uriah's dead. David definitely sinned against Uriah. David recognizes, though, that his relationship with God has changed because of his sin. And he desires to make that relationship whole again. So what does he do? It's very interesting what he says. First he says, I would offer sacrifices, but that's not what you want. David cannot buy his way out of this. David can't go to the priest and say, how many bulls do I have to sacrifice for God to forgive me? It doesn't work that way. And David knows that. David finally realizes that his first sin, before he even saw Bathsheba, his first sin was pride. His first sin was having the attitude, it's good to be the king. I'm the king, I can do what I want, and I can give away with anything. If the king does it, it's lawful because it's the king. That was his first sin, was pride. And so his response, the sacrifice that God desires, is a broken and contrite heart. David must humble himself. David must stop thinking he's too powerful, that he's more powerful than he is. David is seeking God's forgiveness, not through sacrifice, not through shedding of blood, but through a new heart, through a new spirit within him. I had the honor when I was going to college in Houston to meet George Foreman. Now, George Foreman was in his 40s when I met him. And everybody thought his boxing career was over. He was George Foreman, former heavyweight champion of the world. What many people don't know about George Foreman was that on the night after his fight with George Frazier, he died in the locker room. He talks of lying down in the locker room and seeing himself lying there and hearing God say, George, I want your life. And he immediately started to bargain with God. God, I've got all this money. I'll give you all this money. Just let me live. And God said, I don't need your money. I want your life. God, I'm sorry for all the sins. I'm sorry for all the women and all the alcohol and all the partying. Just let me live. And God said, George, I want your life. And he says, oh, you're going to take me? I know. He goes, no, George, I want your life. I want the rest of your life. George Foreman, soon after that fight, announced his retirement from professional boxing. Now, that's what most people know about the story. When George Foreman announced his retirement from professional boxing, he enrolled in a Bible college. When he graduated from Bible college, he enrolled in seminary. And he became a minister for 20 years. And then in his 40s, he re-entered professional boxing and somehow, at over 40 years old, became heavyweight champion of the world again. But people who knew George Foreman said that something fundamentally changed in him the night of his fight with Joe Frazier. Even if they didn't know the story, his story of his vision of God, his call to ministry, they knew something in him had changed. George felt like David felt. I'm on top of the world. I'm the heavyweight champion of the world. I'm the toughest, meanest fighter there is. It's good to be me. Two days later, he was completely different. He was humble. For years, he dedicated his life to perfecting his craft of boxing. And then in one night, he dedicated his life to serving God. Now, George Foreman had been to church most of his life, at least growing up. But he talks about this as the day he was saved. And he talks about how much he was willing to sacrifice. And God did not want that kind of sacrifice. He didn't want his money. But he also talks about how God changed his heart. How God broke the power of pride in his life. George Foreman was one of the most humble people I ever met. And he had reason to be proud of what he had done. But his life was filled with humility from that point on. What did George Foreman do to be saved? What did David do to be saved? They invited God to change them. A broken and contrite heart. A new spirit within me. It is the same thing that we do when we ask Christ into our lives. That you did years ago when you sat in the pew or came to the altar, or maybe when you were at church camp. Whenever you first said, Jesus, come into my life, what you were doing was the same thing David did, the same thing George did. You were inviting God to create a new spirit in you. It's not about sacrifice. We cannot buy forgiveness. David recognized this almost 1,000 years before Jesus came. David recognized that we cannot buy forgiveness. Now we, as Paul reminds us, are not without sin. But the solution is still the same. Ask God, ask Jesus, ask the Holy Spirit to soften your heart, to take away your pride, and to create a new spirit within you. That's what transforms lives. That's what saves us. Our final hymn is number 692. God will take care of you.